Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the International Plant Breeding Seminar Series hosted from the campus of North Carolina State University here in Raleigh. It's a pleasure to have you with us, as well as a pleasure to have Professor Dr. Julia Sibiya talking about food systems transformation in Africa and the relevance of vegetable diversities. Professor Sibiya is the capacity lead for the VAX project, the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils initiative at CIMIT, where she leads the efforts to strengthen African scientific and institutional capacity for climate resilience, nutritious opportunity crops. Dr. Sibiya has a bachelor from the University of Zimbabwe, a master's of plant pathology from the Ohio State University, and a PhD in plant breeding from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. She has supervised, trained over 80 master's and PhD students, co-authors, and more than 150 publications. She also leads the Bambara Groundnut Breeding Initiatives and is a founding member and past president of the African Plant Breeders Association, as well as an advocate of the Bolo Training Foundation. Dr. Sibiya, Julia, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Let me stop sharing and give you the floor. Go ahead, start sharing. Looks good, Julia.
My screen, you can see my screen?
Yes, everything is fine. Take it out from here, okay?
All right, great. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're joining us from. It's indeed a pleasure for me to be presenting. It's evening in Nairobi, where I am based, and I know it's probably morning there in the US, but we also have some that are joining from different parts of the world. So as Carlos has just introduced me, let me just change something here. Okay, so I decided to focus on just food systems in general, transformation in Africa. So I won't be presenting any particular research that I'm doing currently. So there won't be any research data and the like, but I will be highlighting some of the initiatives that I'm involved in and what I'm leading based in CIMIT, and also just explain a little bit about the VAX, Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, and the improvement that we are trying to do for these neglected and underutilized crop species, opportunity crops. Some refer to them as orphan crops, but my focus will be mainly on vegetable biodiversity. And I chose vegetables mainly because I believe they are also central to Africa's journey towards sustainable, nutritious, and resilient food systems. And I know quite a lot of initiatives are focusing on other different crops, but to just encourage more, maybe more research in African indigenous vegetables as well. Okay, so what do we mean by food systems? So in terms of food systems, when we talk about a food system, we are mainly looking at everything that happens from the farm all the way to the table, and how it affects people, how it affects the planet and prosperity. So the definition that I found was that a food system actually encompasses all processes and actors that are involved in producing, processing, distributing, preparing, and consuming the food, but also the outcomes that these activities generate for nutrition, health, environment, livelihoods, as well as equity. So when we look at vegetables, like I said, vegetables, they tend to link the productivity nutrition and resilience, turning the food systems from calorie-based systems where, we have a lot of cereals and the like, to something that's driven by nutrition. So from a calorie-based to a nutrition-driven system. So we're looking at all the way from production, including the different value chains, including markets, consumption, the livelihoods of people, which is their prosperity, their health as well as the environment, which is our planet, and climate resilience. So why is it important for us to transform Africa's food systems, especially bringing in vegetables into it? We find that Africa's fruit and vegetables, there's a shortfall actually on fruits and vegetables in Africa, and there are a lot of imbalances and underinvestment in crop diversity. So when you look at the nutrition, we have a huge gap in nutrition in Africa, where more than 280 million Africans are food insecure. And in terms of diets as well, the diets, we have a lot of imbalances, with more than 70% of the daily calories coming from just a few major staples, from cereals, roots, and tubers, and only about less than 10% from fruits and vegetables. Then in terms of research that's also happening across the continent, the research is also skewed with, when you look at the different breeding pipelines that are available, you find that there are more than 200 breeding pipelines that are focusing on cereals and legumes, maybe roots and tubers as well, across the major organizations, the CGIAR and the majority of the NAS. So like the organization I work for, CIMIT, we concentrate mostly on maize and wheat. We have a few dryland crops as well. You have IITA, ICRISAT, it's the same. Alliance, it's the same. The focus is on the cereals, legumes, roots, and tubers. So there are very few breeding pipelines that are actually focusing on vegetables, and about 15 pipelines according to World Veg 2023 report. So there are about 15 pipelines for vegetables, and for those pipelines, the focus is also mostly on the exotic vegetables like the tomatoes, onions, and cabbages. So research is skewed, and also policies. So some sort of policy misalignments for most of the African countries as well, where if you look at the national agricultural strategies for most of these countries, they only mention cereals in detail, and very few of them actually include vegetables beyond the horticultural export targets. So this is the reason why we really need to advocate and encourage also the consumption and production of vegetables. So just Africa itself, it also faces a severe shortfall in vegetable supply. So we have issues of affordability and access, and because of these issues, most of the communities are pushed towards less nutritious staples, and this again reinforces malnutrition and food insecurity in Africa. So if we look at the global food and vegetable supply availability, it remains insufficient in Africa. So looking at the supply to need ratios, as you can see, Africa has the lowest, with Europe having the highest. And for Africa, the significant deficit is also poses the highest risk for nutrition insecurity in Africa, and other regions like Asia they are moving towards parity, and this is mainly also driven by production increments that are happening in China, especially, which are also leading to that. And then the Americas and Europe, they have adequate supplies relative to the regional population needs. So we have a lot to do in Africa. And besides the affordability and access, you also find that the cost of a healthy diet itself in Africa is among the highest in the world relative to the income that most of the households get. And so it continues to rise as well, faster than the global average. So for example, just looking at Kenya, a healthy diet costs more than 60% of the daily net income for low income households. So it's really not affordable. So most communities, as I said, they then tend to go to move towards less nutritious staples, which then reinforces malnutrition and food insecurity. And if you look at the map also of Africa here in terms of annual vegetable consumption in terms of kgs per capita, you can see the highest that we have in Africa is in Tunisia with about 250 kgs per capita, with the lowest about 7 in Chad, which is really low. And on average, most of the African countries range from between 5 and 60 kgs per capita, which is really low. And this is an issue that's really worrying if you also then compare with the World Health Organization targets and recommendations that the World Health Organization has set. So you find that in sub-Saharan Africa, the average intake of vegetables per person per day is less than 200 grams per person per day, versus the 400 grams per person per day that has been set by the World Health Organization. So the issue is also both of the affordability and access issues. Like, as I said, the cost, so healthy diets remain out of reach for most of the African households. So which means that vegetables are not just a nice to have on your plate. They're actually central to tackling some malnutrition, any diet related diseases, and food security. So we really have to advocate and promote these healthy diets. And we've also seen that there's a pilot that happened in Ethiopia on healthy diets, a policy on healthy diets in Ethiopia, which actually increased school meal vegetable consumption by 40%, just by changing procurement strategies, like sourcing nutrient-rich, locally grown vegetables directly for school canteens. So this actually changed the consumption, and this pilot so successfully improved both the diversity and the quantity of vegetables that were being consumed by the learners. So advocacy and promotion is actually important. And I think the latest statistics that I've seen say as of 2024 to 2025, the global supply to need ratio is slightly improved, even for Africa, but it's still below what is expected or what has been said by the World Health Organization. So we still have a lot to do to encourage consumption of food, nutritious, healthy foods, especially fruits and vegetables in Africa. Then also looking at production of vegetables in Africa, we find that the vegetable production is actually dominated by just a few crops, with tomatoes actually leading So there's also an importance for diversifying also these vegetable production by including some of the nutrient dense and climate resilient vegetables. So if you just look at these statistics by crop category and the market share, we find that the solanaceous crops like the tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, they tend to dominate and occupying more than half the share market for vegetables in Africa, followed by the brassicas like cabbage, kale, broccoli, spinach, and then we have roots and bulbs like onions, carrots, then the cucurbits, and then these are the traditional African vegetables, which only occupy 9% of the market share. So there is an over dependence on tomatoes, onion, cabbage, and pepper in Africa. So we are actually calling or advocating for diversification and also improved markets maybe for these traditional African vegetables. And so according to statistics from FAO, more than 75% of Africa's vegetable output is based on tomatoes, onion, cabbage, and pepper. And the horticultural industry in Africa is also focusing on those crops, which tend to offer 5 times more income per hectare compared to cereals. So you find a lot of farmers like in Ghana, for example, this is the biggest vegetable market in Accra, and you can see a lot of tomatoes. I was in Accra about three weeks ago, and they were talking about tomatoes, and that it's a huge thing in Ghana, and it's a huge thing in most African countries as well. And so in Ghana, the tomato belt actually employs more than 12,000 youths who are involved in tomato production. But we also need to increase the production of the other indigenous vegetables. And the trend that we've seen also so far is that some of the indigenous greens like the African nightshade, the cowpeas, the amaranth are also on the rise in some of the countries, particularly in, I think, East and Southern Africa. We've seen a rise in some of those vegetables as well. So it's important for us to ride on that wave where we see that there has been an increase in some of these vegetables production. So when we look at Africa, we actually have a unique opportunity for us to actually innovate with the resilient, nutritious crops that we have. So indigenous vegetables, they actually are one of Africa's own innovation for resilience and nutrition, which can be unique to us. But we actually need structured breeding, we need seed multiplication, we need also policy visibility, because most of these crops, they don't have any formal sort of, even seed systems, there are no formal seed systems, and it's seed that's probably exchanged amongst farmers in different communities. But these crops can actually anchor climate resilience and nutrition sensitive agriculture. And so if we invest in them, we can strengthen both the health and livelihoods of our communities. So that's why I feel they should be really a big part in transforming Africa's food systems. And why? So these are some of the vegetables. So the indigenous vegetables are nutrient dense, and they are adapted and culturally relevant. So in terms of adaptation, they used to grow some of them, like they used to be referred to as weeds, but these are really important vegetables. So, and in terms of nutrition, they're really nutrient dense, and some of them even having more like iron and calcium than some of the exotic vegetables like amaranth and African nightshade. They provide up to 3 times more iron and calcium than spinach. They are also drought tolerant, so they can contribute to climate resilient agriculture. They are also short cycle. They mature in 4 to 6 weeks versus 3 months for tomatoes. And they are also gendered crops, and you find them, they are grown, the majority of the production comes from women, and women also form more than 70% of small-scale African indigenous vegetable traders, especially in East Africa, in countries like Kenya and Tanzania. And in Tanzania, there was a healthy horticulture project which actually doubled the African indigenous vegetable yields by using improved local seeds. So we also see that breeding and seed systems, if they are improved, they can actually enhance production and resilience. So for us to also start, improving these and making sure we have sustainable use of these genetic biodiversity, we also need germplasm conservation to be in place. And germplasm conservation is actually the biological foundation of any food systems transformation. And it's not just about safeguarding the past, but it's a foundation for Africa's food future as well. So here I just want to highlight a rescue plan that has been published, an African Vegetable Biodiversity Rescue Plan, which is a 10-year African Union endorsed strategic framework that was developed with the leadership of the World Vegetable Center and the African Union Commission. Under the African Union Commission, we were also privileged as the African Plant Breeders Association to be leading the Plant Genetic Resources Management Working Group, which is under the African Union Commission, which then worked together with World Vegetable Center and other partners from national programs and from regional bodies and some other international organizations as well, like Crop Trust and the like, were also involved in this. And this publication actually, or the rescue plan, focuses on preventing the loss of traditional vegetables and focusing on rescuing, conserving, and using these genetic resources responsibly or sustainably for us to be able to improve nutrition, climate resilience, and income through improved seed systems, policy integration, and community engagement. So on that, you can actually access the e-copy of this rescue plan on this link that I have provided. But for those who are aspiring to work on these indigenous vegetables, it will be good for you to have a copy that you can look through and just see some of the efforts that are being made to actually, make sure that we sustain these genetic resources, but we also use them in a sustainable way. And the main key objectives and actions from this rescue plan. I've just picked some of the 4 key objectives. It's rescue and conservation, where we are looking at salvaging, collecting, and conserving the vegetable species, the indigenous vegetable species, as well as their wild relatives as well, through complementary ex situ, like gene banks, and in situ as well, like using community seed bank initiatives. So we need to collect them, to conserve them, and then to strengthen seed systems as well, where we develop sustainable seed systems to ensure that farmers actually have access to high quality locally adapted and nutrient-dense seeds. So it's important if we have to promote production of these crops, it's important for us to also ensure that we have a supply of seed that is affordable to the farmers, but that is also it's of quality as well. Then I talked about policies, that they were also like policy misalignments in most of the African countries. So policy and mainstreaming is also important. It's one of the key objectives from that rescue plan, where we are encouraging integration of traditional vegetables into national food and nutrition policies. And this can include school feeding programs to boost local consumptions, or even in hospitals to boost local consumption, hospitals, prisons, and the like. Then there's research and development as well, where we can utilize digital and genomic tools to characterize and improve these crops, focusing on climate resilience and nutritional value. So all this is also aimed at promoting the production of these opportunity crops, or especially the indigenous leafy vegetables, as this is a rescue plan for vegetables. Okay, so as I talked, that conservation, germplasm conservation is not just about safeguarding the past, but it's the foundation of Africa's food future. So it also connects farmers and researchers with the local or regional gene banks. So conservation is important. The community seed banks, they also help farmers and communities to regain control over their seeds and improve local seed systems. So what we've observed for the majority of these indigenous neglected, underutilized crop species, which we also call opportunity crops, it's like there are no formal seed systems for most of them. And so we also encourage the communities, they hold the seeds, they have the genetic diversity. So if we help them to set up these community seed banks, we're giving them also power over the seeds that they have. And this can also improve their local seed systems. Just one example, in Zimbabwe, they have an NGO called the Community Technology Development Organization, CTDO, which has set up about 21 community seed banks across 12 districts in Zimbabwe. And these community seed banks, they help to conserve, restore, and revitalize the plant genetic resources. They also focus on the local varieties of the crops. And this has strengthened cooperation among the farmers and other groups, and also increased seed diversity in farmers' hands. So these communities have actually been capacitated. They've been trained on how to conserve and restore and revitalize these plant genetic resources. So we're actually empowering the communities, and this way, by empowering them, we're also sort of emphasizing the importance of these crops and the genetic resources that they are holding. And this Community Technology Development Organization, they've also set up a seed company that deals with these underutilized crop species, where they are also bringing in some youths to do seed production for them. And so the youth, they also have also realized that they can make money out of these crops as well. So it's also another area of creating employment for the youths. And as I said, you can conserve, but you also need to make sure, if we have to encourage production, we need to ensure that there's quality seed of these indigenous vegetables that is available throughout the year, at affordable prices. And to just highlight one example again from Zimbabwe, from Marondera University of Agricultural Science and Technology, they are really working on these indigenous crops, coming up with different innovations for the different crops. And so they also have these indigenous vegetables that they are focusing on, and they have started also packaging, and you can find seed packets like in shops now of these African indigenous vegetables. For example, this is to just show one example of seeds, $1 each a packet. I'm not sure how many grams. I can see about 30 grams in a packet. And this is a seed of amaranth. Amaranth, which is called moa in the local language, and this is Gynandropsis gynandra spider plant called Nieve in the local language. So they are making now seeds available for these opportunity crops for those who would want to produce. In the past, you wouldn't find these in the shops. You wouldn't buy packets of. You'd find seed packets of tomato seed. You'd find seed packets of cabbage, kale, and all the other exotic vegetables, but not indigenous vegetables. So this is also progress that's happening towards promoting these indigenous vegetables. Now I just want to zero in on one of the initiatives also that is geared towards transforming agri-food systems. And there are many initiatives, and I can talk about all of them for these African indigenous crops, the African orphan crops. I need to mention it. They actually set the foundation, the scientific foundation for work on these indigenous vegetables, where they listed about 101 crops, crop species from Africa that and they are promoting coming up with genomic tools for that, reference genomes, and they've also capacitated breeders working on some of these crops through the African Plant Breeding Academy, which is a course for professional plant breeders to just get equipped on breeding of these crops. But now we also have another initiative, and there are other initiatives that are also focusing on different indigenous vegetables. So I'll just highlight the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, which is the acronym VACS. Which is a global movement transforming agri-food systems through opportunity crops and healthy soils. So when it was started, it was initially, it focused on Africa initially, but it's now a global movement. And you find VACS also on other continents as well. So to just give a context, the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, it was launched in February 2023, so it's quite recent, by the United States State Department in collaboration with, or in partnership with, the African Union and the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, with the objectives to build a resilient food system across Africa by boosting productivity of opportunity crops, improving nutrition through developing and deploying diverse climate resilient cropping systems, building healthy soils, and strengthening the capacities of researchers in Africa. And this vision, or these objectives, were fully aligned with the Africa Union's Agenda 2063, as well as the FAO Strategic Framework 2022 to 2031, which looks at better production, better nutrition, better environment, and a better life for all, leaving no one behind. And so how this came about, there were different workshops that were held, but the first workshop tried to prioritize crops for different regions, and they tried to draw from 4 different publications that had lists of crops with the African Orphan Crops Consortium, and then other 4 different publications, where the FAO then narrowed it down to about 150 crop species, which then they provided nutritional data to that. And from the 150 now, they invited experts. The experts were from diverse groups, including plant breeders, nutritionists, climate modelers, and economists. So it was a mixed bag of experts who then narrowed this list of 150 to 60 crops. And so it's from these 60 crops that a lot of different initiatives have been selecting. Because of the 60, about 20 were then more modeled further to just see how they would fare, like in 2050 under changing climate and the like. And so different initiatives have been selecting from these crops. So for the vegetables, these are some of the vegetables that are listed in that crop list of 60. So as you can see, I was just talking to Carlos, and he indicated he's worked with jute mallow and some other legumes. So there are lists of vegetables. There's a list for legumes, a list for cereals, a list for nuts and oil crops, a list for root and tuber crops, and a list for fruit trees as well. So these were prioritized for the different regions to just see, is it low priority, medium? So as you can see, one crop may have a high priority in one region, but not in the other region. So we have a lot to work with in different regions, and we can promote different vegetables in different regions. So based on these lists, on these workshops that came from VAX, CIMMYT got funding to then implement some of the activities, but focusing on crop improvement, that is on breeding and related stuff on crop improvement. So looking at breeding, so there were 7 crops that were selected for breeding, and then there were also some crops which were like low-hanging fruits. There were already some varieties or some improved varieties that were available but needed to be scaled up. So the seed systems and pigeon pea got some special preference because of the problems with some insects. So there's BT pigeon pea, and then there is VAX capacity building and strengthening. So all the different activities sort of have a capacity building component. And CIMMYT is not working alone, it's working with other CGIAR centers and other national programs and advanced research institutions. So there are many partners that are involved in this initiative. So just looking at the VAX breeding network, for example, so there are 7 crops that were chosen, the 7 that I've listed here, and 2 of those are vegetables, amaranth and okra. And amaranth and okra breeding is being led by World Vegetable Center. So besides CIMMYT coordinating everything, CIMMYT is not leading in the breeding of all the crops. So World Veg is leading in amaranth and okra because that's their special. They specialize in vegetables, and they're working with their NAS partners, Tanzania, Kenya, Benin for amaranth, Nigeria, Ghana, but there are also other partners who may not be like the core sort of team, but they then reach out to other countries as well, especially those that are still in gray here. They may not be involved in the actual breeding or the actual improvement, but they might then benefit from evaluations and all that for the different crops. So it's a huge network that has been formed, which includes the CGIAR centers and the NAS, and we have universities as well in there working on this, on improvement of these crops. And so just looking at some of the I'm sure there were two seminars, probably one on okra and the other one on market intelligence from some of the partners from the VAX breeding network that were presented in this series. So some of the breeding pipelines for these opportunity crops, here the African Orphan Crops Consortium and some of the other partners, they proposed an integrated breeding program for orphan leafy vegetables, which is published in this publication. I'm sure the slides will be shared, so you can get the link also for the publication. And so this is focuses on a multidisciplinary sort of approach, which takes advantage of modern advances in genomics and breeding to guide concerted, inclusive, and efforts by researchers to ensure that there are improved nutritional outcomes to the consumer. So bearing in mind that for most of these crops there hasn't been any research done at all. So you start with bringing in stakeholders and also germplasm collections, defining the product targets, then characterizing the genetic resources and for the different traits, then developing now the cultivars, can integrate the genomic tools in the genomic data, your multi-environment trials as well to select the candidates that can be then recommended for release, and also looking at the value chain development itself, from outreach activities to promote them, cropping systems, post-harvest management, and seed systems development, as well as looking for funding to sustain these investments or this production as well. So you can find this reference. I've shared the link, and within the VAX breeding, they have adopted the stage gate process, which is used in the CGIAR for the other major crops. So which also starts with market intelligence, where you designing your target product profiles and your market segments. Then you move on to trade discovery. So you have your product design, then you go to your trade discovery, trade deployment, breeding pipelines, and seed systems. So for the 7 crops that the VAX breeding is focusing on, the entry points could have been different. A few of the crops were already already had some sort of breeding pipelines, but then there are some that didn't have any breeding pipelines, which might have been starting from scratch. But we've tried to have market intelligence for all the crops. And you can also find these steps in a recently published Nature Communications, Steps to Transform African Opportunity Crops into Reality Crops, which a publication by all the leads scientists involved in the VAX breeding network. And so within each of the different crops, they are also looking at how can some of these breeding pipelines be modernized. So priorities are different depending on the crop. So some focusing on genomic prediction, some on trait discovery and dissection, precision phenotyping, breeding pipeline optimizations, genotyping, and genomics. So this tends to differ with the crop and the stage at which that particular crop was. So this is what is happening in the breeding. So within this VAX breeding, so we have amaranth and we have okra that are receiving breeding attention as vegetables. And I mentioned the the capacity that we have. So we are also working with scholars. We're supporting scholars, masters, PhDs, and professional breeders so that they can gain tools or skills that can assist them in accelerating their own breeding programs. But we've tried to integrate them within the breeding teams for the 7 different crops. So the main objective is we want to expand the workforce that will be working on opportunity crop improvement, upgrading skills for professional plant breeders, and strengthening also professional networks. So in a way, we are also forming like communities of practice around these different crops. And we've set up like a hub and spoke sort of model where we have a few hubs. So we have a South-South collaboration. We also have a North-South collaboration, and our hubs are not just from Africa. So we also have the 2 US-based support entities, Iowa State University and Cornell University. So they are assisting with some of development of modules and some trainings and also mentoring and all that. So we are working with a lot of different institutions, which can be from CG centers, private sector, advanced research institutions, and universities. And currently we have 18 host universities within Africa that are hosting the scholars. Then we also have different institutes that are hosting our professional breeders, where they spend between 1 and 6 months for certain skills that they need upgrades on. And all these fellows are linked to ongoing VAX, plant breeding and seed systems. And we also invite trainings from other organizations or institutes that are not really part of the VAX breeding or seed systems or the VAX capacity. So we are open to working with anyone, whatever skills we need for these scholars. Okay, so having said much about breeding, for us to transform these seed systems, we need also to strengthen the value chains, in especially reducing losses, because for most of these leafy vegetables, they are highly perishable. And so if we can reduce we can reduce losses, we can, it's actually a big potential for making the vegetables more available and affordable if we can reduce these losses. And so reducing losses is actually a low-hanging fruit for improving nutrition, but we need investments and in the logistics and in processing for us to actually have a positive outcome. So because the biggest problem in Africa is their weak cold chains, infrastructure gaps, longer, less efficient supply chains, so which result in almost 30 to 50% of the vegetables lost in post-harvest, and it could even be more because of the weak cold chains that we have. So we've seen that cold storage reduces losses by 25% and increases trader profits. Local SMEs drive much of Africa's domestic vegetable boom, and they need this infrastructure, they need these systems. And also a lot of innovation is needed also on how these vegetables can be stored, what sort of products, other products can we come up with that can ensure longevity in storage. So, for example, Nigeria's e-fresh logistics pilot actually reduced spoilage by 1/3. So interventions can be very positive and can also assist in boosting these indigenous vegetables. So in terms of policy, research, and action, what do we need to do? What can we do? So we can integrate vegetables into the national dietary healthy diet frameworks, and have explicit targets for vegetables, not just for cereals. Invest in seed systems especially for these indigenous vegetables, cold chain logistics, market infrastructure, value chain, value addition can also assist, support public procurement, schools, hospitals. This can anchor demand and improve affordability. We can link vegetable strategies to climate resilience and cropping systems diversification, where we can combine legumes, vegetables, and cereals in the cropping system. So understand the cropping systems on the ground and maybe see how we can improve those cropping systems. Promote cross-sectoral collaboration, where we can have, agricultural departments, nutrition, health, and trade come together, come to the same table and discuss, how you can collaborate, because these the outcomes for all this agriculture, nutrition, health, and trade. Looking at Africa, only 7 out of the 54 countries mention vegetables in their food policies. The rest, they don't. So vegetable inclusion in public procurement has been seen to improve diets. And Rwanda had a campaign where they called 1 cup of vegetables a day, school campaign, which has worked very well. So it's important, just as insights from a publication that came out last year from transforming Africa's food systems, the pathways to resilience, nutrition, and recovery. So it just advocates for resilience, where we can address climate and crisis shocks, then nutrition, where we ensure access to healthy diets, and we have recovery, where we are looking at driving innovation, data, and governance coherence, where we can have this agriculture, trade, nutrition, health ministries maybe come together, and together this can build resilient, inclusive, nutrition-driven food systems. So in conclusion, I just put a few calls to action and maybe some next steps, but I just want to highlight that vegetables are not just side dishes. They are at the backbone of Africa's nutrition revolution. Vegetables are at the heart of Africa's food systems transformation, and they're probably one of the missing links in building a resilient, nutritious, and food secure Africa. So we need to encourage more research, more work on vegetables as well. Maybe we can increase some of these breeding pipelines as well to include these vegetables. So we need to scale up breeding and seed systems for indigenous and commercial vegetables. Although I know some countries, they are very, very high on commercial vegetables. We can invest in post-harvest infrastructure, data systems, embed the vegetables in national nutrition and school feeding policies, strengthen collaboration across research, private sector, and policy. And some of the initiatives like the VAX is trying to do that, where we are collaborating across different sectors, different institutions, and also empower youth and women through vegetable value chains. As I mentioned, these are gendered crops. You find a lot of women involved in this, but we are also attracting youths. I mean, there's still lots of opportunities to attract youths in different components of the value chain. So by linking research, policy, market action, I think we can build a resilient, nutritious, and food secure continent. I want to thank you and to thank North Carolina State University again for inviting me to do this presentation.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you so much. Very well done. Please post your questions in the chat. While we're waiting for questions from the audience, I wanted to ask you, how would BACS measure impact? I mean, what would be a good situation to be 5-10 years down the road after BACS invest in these less developed vegetables and plants in general?
Okay, sorry, can you come again?
Yes. How would you measure impact in BACS? After 5-10 years, what would be a good place to be regarding these less known species?
Okay, 5 to 10 years, we are looking at, because we are with VAX, we are looking at moving these crops from being invisible or in them being orphan, in them being underutilized to become, reality crops, maybe crops that are featuring in the main food economy of countries, maybe with a lot more people, so also working on these crops, like as I said, the youths also gaining employment from these particular crops, exports, because some of them have got huge export potential as well in terms of the nutrition being nutrient dense and the like, and also where they are affordable, especially for our communities. We want a situation where these are affordable and having a health diet doesn't cost you that much. So that's what we are looking for, because we want diversification in these diets. If we can transform the food system from just calorie based, because a lot of these high calorie crops, they are cheaper and all that. So we want this affordability, access to the communities, and that way we can solve the malnutrition and all that, but also having some of these being exported. So with VAX, we are looking at that. So that's why we've gone for some of the low-hanging fruits where we can quickly sort of come in with seed systems and develop food systems and all these promotions and campaigns. So yeah, 5 to 10 years, if we have to look back, if we haven't done that as VAX, we have failed.
Sure.
But yeah.
Can you please stop the sharing, Julia, so we can, there you are.
Okay.
Thank you. So yeah, the other, I don't know if it is a question, but it's an observation, is that what we have seen here, particularly in the last 3 years working with Dioscorea yams here in North Carolina State, is that we have boosted the interest of people in yams, okay? And I think there's a lot to do with indigenous vegetables. I think Gladys is part of the audience here, and the work that she has done. Now you can see some of these indigenous vegetables here and around our university, because people is very interested, okay? Community gardens, organizations that promote nutritious foods, they're growing some of these indigenous vegetables. And that, you may say, well, that benefits developed countries, but not so. But when you let them know that some people in the world is using these highly nutritious vegetables in different ways, you open up the door for more interest, more resources, and more awareness, okay? So I would sort of advocate for you to reach out to institutions like ours to promote that awareness, okay? Because we can serve as ambassadors. I consider myself a yam ambassador here in the US, trying to promote the crop as much as possible. And trust me, that goes a long way, okay? Because a lot of the time you invest taxpayer dollars, and if the taxpayers are aware of what they're financing, is good. Let me just, there's been some questions here.
Yeah.
How the new cultivars are released by CGIAR in collaboration with NARS is for a specific country, or mega environments cover several countries? Question from Raja.
Okay, so the CGIAR doesn't release varieties, so we do work with partners, with partners in releasing, or with local seed companies in releasing. So they lead on the releasing. So you're asking how, whether it's per country or it's is the question in
As
the
as a region in general, yeah.
Okay, so we don't actually do it as a region, because Africa's agroecologies are very diverse. So okay, I think I was talking to you, Carlos, about Bambara. We were talking about Bambara. So taking Bambara, for example, I'm working on research in Bambara, and what we've discovered is some of the lines that we got that were coming from West Africa to Southern Africa. There were some crosses that we got that involved parents from West Africa and some from Southern Africa. But what we've been seeing now, these are really photo period sensitive. And so you see very good vegetative growth, but in terms of seed yield, nothing. So we can't actually release based on the regions, on or regional. So normally we look at environments that are similar. So in Southern Africa, for example, most of the environments are similar. So there are also some seed harmonizations that have been taking place, like under different regions, where we can release in South Africa, for example, and then it can be taken up in Zimbabwe, in Zambia, within the SADC region, because the regions are sort of similar. So if you're talking about that regional, yes, we can do that, but normally we look at that's why we do multi-location trials, to just sort of group the environments to see which environments are similar, which are not, so that whatever we have, we can then either it is broad adaptation or it is specific adaptation. So for East Africa, for example, it can be possible.
All right, Julia, thank you so much. I know there's a couple more questions. You guys can find Julia's email address within the CGIAR directory, or you can ask us for the address to continue this conversation. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, for making us aware of this program, okay? Thank you for people attending this seminar, and we look forward to have you next Thursday for the last seminar of this series that has focus on African plum breeders. We're going to have a presentation by Osman Wolkar, who is the cowpea breeder from IITA. We're looking forward to have you here for closing this series, the 11th series. And thank you so much. Thank you, Brandon, for your help. Thank you, Julia. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, and everybody have a wonderful weekend, okay?
Thank you. And
all
bye.
right. Thank you. Bye-bye.